Welcome everyone to the Canadian Diabetes Association's 2016 webinar series. My name is Farah Ismail and I will be your host for today. We're delighted that you're able to join us for a webinar to learn about diabetes burnout, what it is, and how to beat it. Now to start us off, I'd like to draw your attention to our survey. It's located at the top right-hand section of your screen. In order to better serve your needs, we kindly ask that you provide us with your input in the survey towards the end of the presentation, and we thank you in advance for your input. Throughout the presentation, you will also have the opportunity to ask questions. So this can be done simply by typing in the question and answer box that's located at the bottom right-hand section of your screen. And our presenter, Crystal, will be happy to respond to the questions at the end of our presentation. As well, we will be displaying a few polling questions throughout the presentation and would love for your participation. It is important to note that we do keep the responses completely anonymous. Also note that you're able to customize your screen so you can expand each of the webinar pods if you feel like you'd like to. So that can be done by simply dragging down the bottom right-hand corner of each of the webinar screens. Our presentation today will last about 40 minutes in length, and we'll have about another 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. And just a reminder that our presentation is recorded today and will be made available on our CDA website probably later this week. So now I'd like to welcome our speaker, Crystal Johnson, and thank her for joining us today. But before turning it over to Crystal, I'd like to give you a brief introduction. Crystal Johnson is a registered clinical counselor in Vancouver, BC. Her personal experiences with the psychological toll of diabetes led her to work to promote living effectively and vibrantly when a person has a health condition. She has navigated the challenges of living with type 1 diabetes for over 25 years and recognizes the ebbs and flows of daily disease management. In her clinical work, she provides support and explores tools for coping when a person has a chronic disease or other medical conditions. Crystal partners with her clients to process each individual's unique challenges, to harness their personal strengths, and to empower people to move forward with confidence and compassion for their own journey. So for more information on Crystal, please read our speaker bio section, which is located to the left of your screen. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you Crystal Johnson.
Hi, everyone, and it's great to be here today. Just as we're getting started here, I would encourage you to take a look at the handout and the offerings that the Diabetes Association has also put together for you. The handout in particular is one that I've designed it so that you can start to fill it out throughout the webinar today. So if you have a chance now, we're going to be doing a few questions just to get a sense of who's listening today to start with. So while we're doing that, if you don't have that handout in front of you, it'd be a great time for you to pull it up and maybe print it off and just have that so that you can work through that. And by the end of the presentation, you'll have a resource that you can use going forward with your own journey with your diabetes. So as I said, the first thing we'll do is find out who you are. So the first question that we have for the polling question today is, how are you affected by diabetes? And so there's a poll there, and you can type in your answers into your system there. And I'll just give you a few moments here to submit your answers, and then we'll take a look and see who's with us today. So taking a look and seeing there's a variety of people here today, and it looks like there's a number of people with type 1, a number with type 2, family members, and also quite a large percentage of healthcare professionals with us today. So really thank you for sharing your answers. And our next question is, because we do have, it looks like about half of the audience that participated in that first poll are healthcare professionals, which of the following best describes you? And again, I'll just give you a few moments there to submit your answers. Okay, we can see the results there. So again, we have a variety of people there with us today. So those are my disclosures about having a private practice. And a little bit about me. Sarah did a lovely introduction there, but I am a clinical counselor and I work in Vancouver. With my counseling role, I work with people with many physical illnesses to work towards having mental wellness. And a large proportion of the people who I work with are people with diabetes because I am type 1 myself. And burnout and distress are topics that I really love to explore because they're things that I have dealt with and continue to deal with myself. And today the talk is going to focus primarily on young adults and adults with type 1 diabetes, but many of the ideas and suggestions really do apply to those with type 2 as well as with the listeners who care for or live with someone who has diabetes. So there's something in here hopefully for all of the different types of people who are listening today. And I always like to know who I'm talking to or hearing from, so that's me, so you guys have a sense of who I am. And if you did happen to be present for the webinar I did on a similar topic last year, there is a lot of overlap, but I think there's probably still a lot here that you can gain from this. And having that handout in particular is one thing that I think will differ this one from the previous one because it will allow you to work through this and have something you can take away at the end. So let's dive in with one more question. So what do you think, which of the following that are listed there represent potential diabetes burnout? Feeling apathetic or disinterested in diabetes management? Snapping at your friends when they ask you about your diabetes? Feeling euphoric about a good HA1C result? A sense of dread about the future? Or persistent fears about having low blood sugars? And again, I'll just give you a moment to fill in your answer. Okay, so thank you very much for your input on that. So with that one, all of those ones, aside from the feeling euphoric about the A1C result, those are all potential signs that you're experiencing burnout. And so as we open this discussion, I'd like you to consider this picture. So take a moment now to see what thoughts and images arise for you when you look at and imagine yourself in that situation. And what might look to most people like a relaxing summer day appears somewhat differently to those of us with diabetes and those who care for someone with diabetes. When shown to people without illness, they'll often say words like, oh, it makes me think of summer and family, fun, barbecue, bike rides. And for people with diabetes, there's a lot of more uncertainty that comes into it. How many carbs? What do I bolus? Will that bike ride cause my son to go low? Is he going to be mad at me when I ask him if he's low? Did I bring enough supplies? Will my insulin get too hot in the sun? Where can I put my pump while I swim? So an event that might seem pretty relaxed and easy for a lot of people is usually at least a minor stress for people who are involved with diabetes. So everybody in life has things that cause stress. And the challenge for those with diabetes and those who care for them is that we have all of the typical stressors, and then we also face many necessary daily management activities. This can be particularly true for a young adult moving from a higher degree of supportive care in childhood where mom or dad or the team might help them with some of these activities, and then they're moving to more independence and more ownership over these tasks as an adult. In our healthcare system, we typically focus primarily on physical symptoms and how to relieve those symptoms. The emotional or psychological aspect of illness or caregiving doesn't always receive the same attention. Yet we do know that addressing the whole person, physical and emotional, benefits your overall health and leads to better disease management and better quality of life. And that leads us right nicely into the next question for all of you is, how often do you discuss your mental or emotional health with your healthcare team? And again, I'll give you a moment to put in your answers there. Thank you again for submitting those answers. And I'm actually thrilled to see that there's even a quarter of you who are saying that they're discussing it at every appointment. That is really encouraging to me. Many of my clients report that they never or almost never discuss the emotional impact of diabetes with their doctors unless they're in a crisis situation. And it looks like that is the experience for some of you who are, a third of you at 34% here, who have also mentioned that they're never talking about their mental and emotional health. So many people are reluctant to bring up the idea of having a mental health concern with their team because they fear being labeled or of having yet one more thing to deal with. But there are many healthcare providers who are willing and able to support you, but you might need to be the one who brings it up. Emotions are important for a topic for people with diabetes or any chronic illness, as we and many of our caregivers are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and anger in our lifetime. And in addition, it's really common to experience relationship stress, fear, sleep difficulties, grief and loss, obsessive behaviors, disordered eating, and fatigue. So the impact of dealing with our disease has a significant toll on our mental health, and we do need to remain vigilant to this fact. This is equally true for the person with diabetes and for those who care for them, parents and partners. Parents and partners often struggle too as they try to be supportive, but they have worries and fears of their own about what the future will bring. So it's vital that we're proactive in seeking help for these issues if they arise. And please note that if you are in an emotional crisis or if you fear that someone you love is in crisis, it really is an emergency. Call 911 or see your doctor immediately. There are times when the burden of disease is just beyond your ability to cope, and it's essential to ask for help, and it's okay to ask for help. The focus of this webinar is on burnout and diabetes distress. If any of those other conditions seem to apply to you, I encourage you to speak about it with your healthcare team, your primary care physician. There are resources and supports available, such as psychological counseling and other supportive therapies. And speaking with your healthcare team, you'd be able to get a referral to services that might be available in your community. I've been throwing this word around out there, but what is burnout? Very simply put, burnout is when the demands of a situation are more than our capacity or ability to meet those demands. So in our context, it's when your diabetes feels like too much for you to deal with. Burnout may also be referred to as diabetes distress, but I'll mostly stick to using the term burnout during this webinar just for simplicity's sake. These are just some of the symptoms you might experience. Feeling overwhelmed, irritability, wanting to stop trying so hard, apathy about diabetes management, a sad or lethargic mood, feeling tired all the time, not performing well at work, poor sleep, tension, wanting to avoid anything diabetes related. And please remember that everybody experiences these things from time to time. We're not expected to always be thrilled about all of our diabetes management. But in burnout, it's more than one of these symptoms is happening, and it lasts for weeks or even months without there being a situational reason. So situational reason being something as being fired or having a death in the family, which could also account for some of these types of symptoms. There is a lot of overlap between burnout and depression, and it can be hard to tell the difference. So one clue looks at the focus of the distressing feelings. In depression, there often is not a specific focus. The experience feels pervasive, and it's there in all areas of your life. In burnout, on the other hand, although many parts of your life are affected, people usually identify diabetes as the common factor to the distress. And if burnout occurs and remains unaddressed, it can progress to depression. If you're unsure if you have depression or if you're really struggling to work with the strategies we discussed, I really encourage you to see your doctor. There are treatments that can help you to overcome depression. So I'm still trying to figure out how to really fit this particular slide into the presentation, but I just saw it and it really just made me laugh. This is just sometimes how I feel about the challenges of diabetes. You know, things that could or should be pleasurable for someone else can sometimes feel like a battle for me. And in general, I find that many people are not aware of the term or the concept of burnout in relation to their diabetes. But when I start to describe it, there's almost universal recognition from the clients who I work with. Parents and loved ones also comment that they experience these same types of symptoms. So the question for you is, have you experienced diabetes burnout given the description that we've talked about today? I'll give you a moment to put your answers in. Okay, so a variety there. And that's what I found when we did the webinar last year too, is that there was a lot of people who said, yeah, I've definitely experienced that. I didn't have a name for it, but that's something that I definitely know that I have had those symptoms in my lifetime. And I really do believe that all of us, those with diabetes and those caring for someone with diabetes, are really trying the best we can. And when we're in the midst of burnout, there are some strategies that we can try. So this next section of the talk, we're going to talk about when you're in the midst of it, when you're in that kind of situation where you're like, yep, I've got burnout, this is happening for me. What are some of the things that you can do? And one of the best places to start is to avoid judgment. Because sometimes we end up judging ourselves harshly because the expectations around us are so high. And this self-judgment adds another layer of distress to an already difficult time. And for those who are transitioning to independent living and diabetes management, it's normal for there to be a learning curve. For example, someone going off to school for the first time. And it takes time to relearn how to do things that may have been done for you up until this point. So be patient and avoid judging yourself. And even more than that too, we also want to avoid judging other people. For parents and partners, try and recognize that although they make mistakes, the person with diabetes really is working hard to manage their health. And for the person with diabetes, we need to avoid judging those around us as well, trying to be aware that our loved ones are affected by our struggles too, and they just want the best for us. Another strategy to try is changing some relabeling or some of the common diabetes norms. So for example, we often talk about good and bad blood sugars. So another way to look at that and to reframe that is to use the terms within target range or outside of target range. Or instead of talking about good food and bad food, we can try using the words foods to choose more often or less often. Small changes like this, they really do start to help to change our thinking in a more adaptive way. You might not feel like it when you're in the midst of burnout, but this is a time when you really do need to connect with your community, whatever that means to you. That could be people in real life or online. Almost every person with diabetes experiences some distress and fatigue during their disease course. It can be really healing to realize that you are not alone in this and it is normal, even though it's uncomfortable. Many people comment that knowing how common it is comforting, as it helps them to recognize that it is a temporary situation and they will come out the other side. Hope is a powerful force in healing. And in that same vein, reach out and ask for the support that you need. Loved ones will often have noticed that something is kind of off, but they might not know how to help. Be as specific in your requests as you can. And asking for help applies to loved ones as well. Walking alongside a person with diabetes can take its toll on you, and it's important that you are supported. Even just taking an afternoon or an evening to chat with a friend can relieve some of the stress and responsibility you might be carrying. Throughout this journey with the burnout, you want to really be attentive to maintaining and nurturing your basic needs. Things that everyone, not just those with diabetes, need. Regular sleep and wake times, good food, personal hygiene. Keeping up with these daily activities helps to maintain some normalcy when you feel apathetic and unmotivated to engage. This may be an area where you can ask for some help. Maybe a family member can help with meal preparation ideas, or your roommate might be able to be recruited to check that you're up in the morning before work. And since you may not feel motivated, it's helpful to use an app or a paper schedule to ensure that you maintain these daily living tasks. If you prefer lists or notes on your phone or device, two popular apps you might want to try are Wunderlist or Evernote. It just provides another structure to make sure that those things that need to be done are actually getting done. When in the midst of burnout, it's necessary to hit the pause button on things you don't need to do as well. Your body, mind, and soul need time to devote to self-care and restoration. That's impossible to do if you're still attempting to run full tilt. You will likely need extra rest and to decline any extra responsibilities. When life is tough, our focus naturally shifts to the negative, and we need to make specific effort to highlight the positives and the successes. These might be very small things, such as remembering to do a post-meal test at work or doing 5 minutes of meditation. But taking pride in even these small accomplishments helps to orient yourself to moving forward at the pace you can. It's important to start where you're at. Mindful breathing helps to induce the relaxation response and brings you into the present moment. I use a lot of mindfulness in my practice, and it's very helpful for a lot of the clients I work with. Many of the distressing feelings that we experience involve looking back towards some mistakes we might have or regrets about the past, or looking forward with fear and anxiety about what's to come. When we focus on the breath, it helps to bring the attention directly to the current experience, which helps to soothe the system. And we're going to practice that now. I like to work on practicing what I preach, so let's pause now and try this out. So wherever you are, just take a moment to close your eyes. Start to notice your breath moving in and out. Notice what happens as you shift your attention from all the things you were doing, typing, watching, commenting, listening, and instead just allow your breath to hold your focus for a few moments, just in and out. No need to do anything more. Just really taking the time to notice how the breath feels in the body, where you notice it the most. Maybe you feel it in your nose. Maybe you feel it at your lips. Maybe you feel your belly or your chest rising and falling. Tuning into that very mindfully and without judgment. You don't have to change anything, just notice. Okay, and you can open your eyes and we'll continue on. And breathing practice leads us nicely into the idea of self-compassion. It's really easy to get caught up in believing that we're weak for struggling or feeling that we should be able to manage everything better. Be kind to yourself. Imagine the kindness you would direct toward a friend if they were in your shoes, and then direct that warmth to yourself. Remember that while you can do many things to optimize your diabetes management, there will always be some uncertainty and things that are outside of your control. Gently acknowledge that you're doing the best that you can and strive to let go of any perfection tendencies. And do things that make you happy. When you're feeling burnt out, the choice of activity might be different, but it's necessary for everyone. And it's important to note you might not feel the same strength of pleasure as you normally do, but try to think of this one in relative terms. Maybe gardening typically is an activity that is a 9 out of 10 for you. It's something that really brings you a lot of joy and a lot of pleasure. If right now, in the midst of burnout, you're starting at 3 out of 10, it might only bring you up to a 5 or 6, but that's still an improvement. Choosing to do things that are self-nurturing is going to help you in restoring balance and motivation. Since diabetes is likely to be with most of us for quite a while, it's helpful to see some humor when we can. There are some great sites and blogs out there that celebrate the somewhat amusing side of life with diabetes. One Facebook group that I absolutely love, I just discovered it this year actually, is called Type 1 Diabetes Memes. And it has a real community feel, and I often find myself laughing out loud at some of the absurd diabetes humor that I can relate to. I recently actually sent one to my mom on Mother's Day that had a picture of someone testing their blood, and I think the tagline was something along the lines of, "Thanks, Mom, because how else would I remember to test my blood sugar?" And that certainly was very true for me growing up, and I think it's really helpful to find these moments where we can laugh at some of the challenges that we're dealing with. So once your energy is more stable and you're feeling better able to cope with the daily diabetes tasks, then it's important to kind of regroup and set yourself up for continued mental wellness. And this is part of the reason why the handout is there, so that you can keep track of some of these things. And if you think of them today, then it's great. You can start to write them down. And if not, you can carry this with you and try and note down these items if you find yourself aware of them in the future. And so take note of the context that was going on as you noticed burnout setting in. So maybe there were specific triggers, like an extra work project or less free time at home or a particular holiday or time of year. And being prepared by knowing the types of settings that are difficult for you allows you to be proactive about building in extra support for yourself if you know you're going to be in a similar situation again. There is a lot of overlap in the presentation of burnout, but you will have a unique constellation of symptoms yourself. And just like a low blood sugar has many similarities, it still looks a little different in every individual. Some people get really shaky and cranky. Other people end up feeling it's more of a skin crawling sensation. So we all have a unique manifestation of the symptom. And if you've just come out of burnout, it's good to spend some time reflecting on how it showed up for you and how you experienced the distress. That way, if you see these symptoms arising again, pay attention. The more you increase your awareness that you're feeling distressed and burdened, the more you'll have opportunities to intervene and avoid slipping on the banana peel. Those same people who support you in the middle of your struggles can also help you to prevent it. Tell them about your personal warning signs and recruit them in noticing the signs that you're in trouble. And be open to hearing that feedback from them if they give it to you. Stay connected to people who bring positivity and caring into your life and nurture those relationships, whether they're near or far. So remember that when you do recruit support, try to give yourself full permission to accept that support, preferably before you are deep in the midst of burnout. This is one of my favorite quotes. This one by Audre Lorde, and my clients hear this one all the time. I've come to believe that caring for myself is not self-indulgent. Caring for myself is an act of survival. It's essential to care for yourself and nurture yourself, especially if you care for someone else as well. We cannot draw water from an empty well. Do you have any quotes or words of wisdom that you find motivating? I'd encourage you to share them with others as inspiration. We can always find new phrases and new things that can help us be inspirational for each of us. And spend some time considering what activities you find soothing and nurturing, things that you choose to do for yourself. Make a list and commit to engaging in these activities regularly in order to care for yourself and sustain your well-being. What ideas do you have? I think there's a discussion area for you guys. I'm not sure about that. But if there is one there, please share those ideas, as I'm sure others will benefit from hearing your ideas. And also write them down on your handout. Write down some generate some list of some of the ideas of things that you can do that are really nourishing and caring for yourself. My bias is for quiet and soothing activities, and so these are the types that I choose and that I've presented here for you, but yours might be different. Self-care really involves anything that you find caring and comforting for yourself. While we certainly don't want to sit indefinitely in sadness, it's definitely okay to experience the grief and loss associated with your disease or the disease of your child or your partner. If you have sadness, anger, or fear related to the losses and limitations imposed by your diabetes, try and find a way to explore that grief. Now, there are many methods to doing that. Counseling is one, but there's also creative pursuits that can be helpful. And the best way to move past a difficult emotion really is to allow yourself to feel it and experience it completely and let it move through you. And it may be a process that you do repeatedly when new losses arise, yet it's important to know that all emotional experiences are valid and they're necessary to live a healthy emotional life where you can thrive. Similar to celebrating the small successes when you're in the middle of burnout, I also suggest you find a creative way to record and capture the successes that occur in your life on a broader scale. Make it a habit to note down your achievements, including large items like a new job or smaller moments, like getting to class or work on time despite having a midnight low. By doing this regularly, it helps to shift our natural human bias to be on alert for threats, instead to a greater awareness of positivity and the good moments in life. And for those accomplishments that feel particularly meaningful for you, put them in a file or a special box. If you find yourself experiencing distress or burnout, looking into this collection of your strengths really helps you to recall that feelings are temporary. The negative experience you're having now is one that you will emerge from on the other side, and that you will again have new strengths and new successes and new achievements over time. Research in positive psychology shows that one of the best ways to find happiness for ourselves is to do things for others, and I see this applying to diabetes as well. Finding ways to give back to the diabetes community is a great way to empower yourself and also to recognize the gifts and talents that you have. There are many ways you might choose to do this. Volunteer with a local agency, participate in a charity run or walk, join an online community, and contribute to the forums. There are many options depending on your interests. It's incredibly rewarding and affirming when you realize that you have wisdom that you can offer up to other people and share your experiences and help them in their journey. Dr. Brene Brown is another person whose work I call on quite frequently in my job, and she's a researcher on shame and vulnerability. And she uses the analogy of values as our lanterns. And so exploring your values is another way to build up resilience to diabetes, burnout, and distress. Values help us to guide the way when it's dark. And I love that metaphor. It really illustrates how important it is to get clear on what matters. Once we have a clear idea of what's important in our lives, we can return to these values when the times are tough. Then our values can help us to make decisions and take actions that make sense for us. So as an example of that, if we consider two people, Dick and Jane, overused people, but they're nice names to use. So if we have Dick who, for example, values safety, consistency, and preparedness, while Jane, on the other hand, counts excitement, pleasure, and spontaneity as her major values. And if those two were both faced with a decision about participating in a last-minute hike, Dick, on the one hand, might consider his values and decide that for him, the unknowns and the worry about his blood sugars mean that the best choice is to forego this outing and wait for one that he has more time to plan and enjoy. Jane, on the other hand, she might choose to go. For her, the unexpected nature of the hike is a positive factor that aligns with her values. Both decisions are good ones, And it's knowing their values that helps Dick and Jane each make the right decisions for themselves. And also, in keeping with this idea of values, is moving towards having a focus on your goals. Having future goals is really motivating, especially when those goals are in line with our values. They help us to get through unpleasant or monotonous tasks. So setting those goals that make sense for us and writing them down somewhere and putting them somewhere you can see them frequently. It gives you a reminder of why you're committed to taking care of your health. And once again, here's self-compassion. It was in the section on immediate coping as well, but I include it again here because I believe so strongly in the importance of this. I mean, if you take nothing else out of this webinar, this is the one I want you to recall. Being kind to yourself is a key trait for people who thrive and who are resilient. It helps you to be open and tender toward your suffering and also to know you have the strength to call upon when you need it. And self-compassion leads naturally to having compassion for others as well. So I think the world would be a better place if it was something we all practiced more regularly. And if you need ideas on how to develop your self-compassion, Kristen Neff is a researcher out of Austin, and her website has many practices that you can try so you can develop and grow your own self-compassion. Her information is included in the handout and the resources section as well. So there's probably many, many more things that I could say about the intricate dance that we have of emotional well-being and physical health. But for now, I shall end the formal part of the webinar here. If you have any lingering questions, please feel free to contact me directly. I will do my best to answer. And in the meantime, we can move over to the question and answer period, guided by Sarah, I believe.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal. You shared with us some very useful information on diabetes burnout, and as well as given us some great tips on how to manage our emotional lows. So thank you so much for that great presentation. So now, as Crystal mentioned, we will be taking some questions. So if you haven't done so already, feel free to type them in the question and answer box. Again, that's the bottom right-hand section of your screen. So we have had some questions come in, Crystal. So with that, I'll start with our first one here. One of our participants has asked, what advice could you give to a type 1 pump wearer who also has adult ADHD and has great stress and difficulties managing diabetes?
That's a great question. So I think this is one of those places where I'd really encourage that person to really recruit support. I think that can be really valuable. I also think that from what I know about ADHD is that one of the things that is often misunderstood is that people think that it's just this scattered attention, but it's actually more as the difficulty focusing attention. So I would try and almost use that as a strength. So that strength of focus and hyper-focus can be used maybe to try and create systems that could work for you. So it might be, finding an element of the diabetes management that you are interested in and doing some intense research on why that part is important. So using the strength that might exist within the ADHD to help you to manage your diabetes and getting support for that as well. So getting someone who you can be accountable for, maybe on your diabetes team or a family or friend who can check in with you. So maybe if you're having that focus is directed towards something else, they can remind you to come back to do whatever diabetes task needs to be done, or setting reminders on your phone or something, some kind of an external method of pulling your attention back from whatever you might be otherwise focused on to remembering to do something that is related to your diabetes that needs to be done.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. Our next question here, one of our folks has said, what do I do if my significant other is bringing home food that is not good for me? I've asked for their help, and they just do not seem to know what to do when I tell them over and over again. And I find that this is giving me a lot of added stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough when the people who you're trying to get to help you are not able to really appreciate the challenge that you're facing. I guess one of the things I would try and do is try writing down what it is that you need, and being able to have it written down in front of you can sometimes be an easier way to approach that conversation. I think sometimes when we are into a conversation with our significant other or loved ones, really easy to get caught into the emotional components of it, and we tend to then get our defenses up, both sides of both parties. And so having something written in front of you, this is what I would actually like for you to be able to do, is a great starting place. And then asking your partner, what is it that they have difficulty with? Trying to get their perspective of, so this is something you've asked for and that you've said that you need, seeing if you can get their perspective on, well, why is it that they're finding this challenging to do? And seeing if together you can brainstorm and come up with an idea of how you can both support each other in your food challenges. And oftentimes people are more willing and able, all of us, to change if we have some input into what that change looks like. So maybe just not bringing that home isn't a great option for them. So maybe you guys are able to collaborate and brainstorm some different ideas about how to manage food in a way that is effective for both of you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Crystal. Our next participant has asked, do you find that diabetes burnout is different for people with type 1 and type 2? And if so, how?
I think burnout itself, I find, is quite similar in both. There often is just a longer duration with type 1, and so there can be different fears. And I have spoken with and worked with a number of parents of children with diabetes, and that actually is, there's a different set of concerns that come up with that. I mean, there's a lot of personalization and fears that come up when you're dealing with your child that are there when you're dealing with yourself, but it's a different quality, I think, sometimes in terms of the way the anxieties run, because you are not the person who gets to actually make those decisions, but you also don't live with the consequences. So you want to be able to manage and help that person the best you can, and yet things are out of your control. In terms of type 2, the other thing that I see a lot of the time is less about the burnout, but a lot about the expectations that come up very early. So I find that the initial diagnosis is often a really hard time for someone with type 2, because they're suddenly being asked to completely upheave their whole life, and they're not ready for it. And they've often had a lifetime of living one way and are suddenly told, and if you don't do this, then you're a bad patient, is kind of the message that I've heard from a lot of people. So that I find is often the biggest place that I need to work with people with type 2 is around, what is that like? What is that diagnosis experience like, and that illness experience of going from not having diabetes to having it? And that happens certainly with type 1, but generally by the time I am working with someone, it's more of a longer-term condition for them.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, Crystal. Our next participant has asked, as a healthcare professional, how do you suggest we bring up the issue of burnout in our everyday practice?
So I'm assuming with that one that they're referring how they bring it up with a client with diabetes and the idea of burnout. And I'm definitely an advocate for just being as upfront and direct as possible. I think that's one of the ways we're going to stop producing some of this stigma around mental health and to bring awareness about it. A great place if you are a healthcare professional right now, and just having watched this webinar, next time you see a client, say, hey, I went to this webinar and they talked about this. Just so I'm bringing up with clients and seeing if this is something you've experienced. That takes away some of the, if there's a fear that the client might be defensive about it or not open to that idea, just talking about, I've learned this new thing and I want to talk to you about it. Is this something you've experienced? Is a great starting place to go from. Also, I think that there's more and more is being done to promote the idea that mental wellness is a component of diabetes management. And so opening up that conversation each time you're seeing your clients, and just, making it a standard part of the practice. You ask about the physical symptoms and you ask about the mental and emotional component as well. So just making it, normalizing the experience so that it's not almost accusatory, which sometimes I think people experience it as, but rather it's just standard practice that we address all parts of the person.
Great. Thank you so much for those tips, Crystal. Our next participant has asked, what is the best approach to motivate a senior with diabetes who feels burnout to start making small changes and taking small steps towards improving their diet?
I think it's always important to really start with where someone's at. So getting a sense of what it is that they're finding challenging right now, and allowing them to have the space to talk about that and where they're finding the challenges. And I think the way the question was phrased is really quite insightful, is that I think it just needs to be small changes. That's one of the things I see with some of the clients I work with who have type 2 diabetes, is they're overwhelmed by the changes, and so it seems like it's all too much, so I'm not going to do any of it. And instead focusing on one small change. So maybe right now, completely revamping the diet isn't an issue, but maybe you switch from full fat milk to skim milk or something along those lines, if that's for example, something that was desired. So really focusing on very small steps and really having that person be involved in the decision-making process again. I think that that's something that is so key, is that when you deal with something like diabetes, I think there's a lot of feeling like so much of it is out of your control. So helping to try and hand that control back to the individual, to the client, is really a key step in having them take ownership and see what changes they want to make and what changes they're capable of making. And another thing to do, again, is consulting values. For a senior, perhaps they have a grandchild that they really want to see grow up. You certainly don't want to be using scare tactics, but discussing with them, what can they do? What do they want to do in order to be around to see that grandchild's wedding or their graduation? So using things that are motivating for them and the things that they want in their life to create goals and changes that make sense to them as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, Crystal. I do see quite a few more questions coming in, folks, and we're really grateful to have them. But in case we don't get them answered today, please do not hesitate to email them. You can email them to us directly at webinars@diabetes.ca, and we'll be sure to pull in Crystal with her expertise to help you get those responses. I'll take our next question here. So one of our participants has asked, can diabetes burnout be considered either a long-term or short-term disability?
That's a great question. It often depends very much on what are the functional changes. In terms of most of the time with long-term disability, from my understanding, and short-term disability as well, is what they're really looking at is what is the functional limitation. So they would want to know, what is it about the burnout that is limiting your ability to do the tasks of your job, because that's usually disability is associated with your work and career life. So it really would be a matter of speaking with your doctor or your healthcare professionals and looking at, are the symptoms that you're having, are they impacting your ability to do your job and functionally? And then that discussion would lead to a decision about whether or not that could be considered a long-term disability. I think that would probably be the best thing to do. I think it's not a blanket yes or no, but it really is something that would need to be consult with your healthcare team about what are the limitations you're noticing because of your symptoms and how is it impacting your ability to participate in your work environment.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, Crystal. So we'll just take a few more questions before we wrap it up for the afternoon. Our next participant has said, my teen is living with type 1 diabetes and she experiences burnout. She's in a relationship and I'm noticing that the relationship is sometimes an added stress. Are there any tips or ways that I can help as a parent?
Yeah, I can see that would be something that would be difficult for a parent to watch. And I think that one of the things would be to really be an empathetic ear. Sometimes that's what people need more than anything, is just someone to listen to them without trying to solve the problem. And that is something that you as a parent can definitely offer. And something else that you might want to help her with is to find resources that she could share with her partner about what kinds of supports she needs. So you two could have a discussion maybe about what are the things she would like her partner to do and how could she ask for them, or what could she offer that would help the partner know how to support her, because they simply might not know how to be a caring, supportive partner of someone who's dealing with diabetes. It's not a familiar thing for many people. And I think that also one of the real challenges for parents is that this is one of those situations where there's an element of having to acknowledge that there's limits of the support that you can provide, and it's uncomfortable, but there's part of it will involve as well allowing her to make her own mistakes and to experience some of the challenges that she does, and learning she can learn how to kind of support herself. Helping her in terms of also resources for her own burnout is a great thing, and then allowing the relationship to develop as it is, and being that empathetic ear, but allowing her to have the experience she's having.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Crystal. I'll just take our last question here. Our participant has said, I am a type 1 diabetic who has experienced some complications, and I'm experiencing some now, along with my boyfriend who has cancer. My sugars are high 20s, low 30s due to the stress and lack of sleep and not eating properly, etc. Where do I start? Do you have any tips for me?
No, it's really tough. Yeah, I have such compassion for that experience. There's so many things going on, right, that with the many different challenges. And in terms of where to start, again, I would go with what's small and what's doable. Looking at what is one change you can make. What is one small change that you can make, and committing to that change and going forward with that. And really having compassion for yourself in this experience, because you have a lot going on, and that's, as I'm sure you recognize and are seeing, that the stressors like that are going to have their effect on the blood sugar as well. And so I would probably start with asking for help and asking for family members, your healthcare team, letting them know how you're struggling. And again, this is where I would be specific in asking them what they can do for you. It could be that you need help in your meal choices, and maybe someone is able to help you with your meal choices. Or maybe you need help getting your boyfriend to appointments, so maybe someone can help with that. But choosing a small change that you feel is manageable, committing to doing that for, say, a week, and then adding in something new if you can. It's really difficult, as you've seen, as it sounds like you're experiencing, to try and change everything at once. It's like there's this blender going on, and you have to try and figure out which item in this blender do I pick out first, and the blender needs to settle. And so taking some time to take care of self-care, do the things you need to take care of yourself, and then starting small, one step at a time, and being really gentle and kind with yourself as you're going forward.
Great. Thank you so much for that very helpful response, Crystal. So everyone, that does conclude our webinar for today. I'd sincerely like to thank Crystal for speaking on behalf of the Canadian Diabetes Association. Once again, it's been a really, really great learning experience, Crystal, so we thank you very much for that. I do want to remind everyone that our webinars will be made available on our diabetes.ca website in the coming weeks, so be sure to check that out. Our last webinar for this series is actually going to be coming up next week on June the 1st, and it's going to be on diabetes technology and new devices. So please be sure to check that out, and we look forward to your participation in that. For those of you who are unaware, our CDA offers mini camps for youth and families of youth living with diabetes. So we have 12 summer camps and 11 family camp programs that help children, youth, and families get the support they need to live well with diabetes. So if you'd like some more information and to register, please visit our website at dcamps.ca. And for those of you in the BC area, we're going to have our next CDA Expo in Kelowna. So that'll be held on Saturday, June the 18th. So for those of you living with diabetes or affected by diabetes, please be sure to check out this free event. So to register, please visit our website at diabetes.ca/expo or call our 1-800 number. For any other diabetes-related information, please feel free to call our 1-800 number. So that's 1-800-226-8464. Thank you very much for your participation today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good day.